So today I do start the brand new sermon series, The Long Black Train. And as you heard this morning, you heard the version of Josh Turner singing that song. Now the series, Long Black Train, may sound a bit different to you, having a series titled that, and it should sound different, because that's exactly what it's meant to be, because the symbolism of the long black train is that which appeals to us, sin that draws us in, and we think it's all right to ride on this train. But the only stop it has is hell. It's hell bound, so don't get on the train. As a matter of fact, don't even wait on the platform. Don't even watch for it to go by, because there's something about this train that lures us in. There's this train called sin that we want to jump on board and we want to take the ride. And while the ride looks like it's fun, and some will even say it's exciting, the result is always the same, and it's not a pleasant one. So don't go riding on that long black train. You see, the fact is that long black train is going to do everything it can to destroy the relationship that you have with God as well as your loved one. So I want to start off this morning by simply saying this. I want you to know that we have a God that is an amazing God, and his love goes well beyond anything that you and I could ever fathom or understand. But I want you to consider the facts that we have about his love for one moment. God's love for the lost regardless of their past. Romans chapter 5, verse 8. God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He has such a deep love, even for us in a fallen state, that he went through pure torture to provide a way for you and I to come back home. John chapter 3, verse 16. For God so loved the world that he sent his one and only Son, that whosoever would believe in him should not perish, but have eternal life. And his love for us spared no expense whatsoever, and it has nothing to do with what you or I have ever done. 1 John chapter 4, verse 10. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice. So you have to understand that because of his love for us, he hates the things that will bring us pain in our life and cause us to stumble in our walk with him, as well as to cause others to stumble in their walk as well. He hates them so much, he doesn't want to see them in our lives. However, I also want you to understand this, that sin is sin, and all of it is evil. And there is not one sin that God will tolerate more than another. But the question must be asked, and that is this: is all sin the same, or is there a level of sin per se, one being worse than the other? And how God looks at it and how God tolerates it? Well, the answer for that is simply this: yes and no. Now, what do I mean by yes? Well, yes in the sense that all sin is unacceptable and detestable to a holy God, and to him they are all equally as repulsive. But no in the sense of the damage that sin causes his children. Now, let me go ahead and show you this, or let's face this fact. There are sins that can devastate people. And then there are sins that people just kind of shrug off as if it's no big deal. And I'm sure you understand, but let me give you an example of that. If someone were to lie about your character, about something that you did, and cause you to get fired, it would devastate you. But not only you, it would devastate you and your family. If someone were to tell you a little white lie that you caught him in, you would kind of just overlook it like it was no big deal. While both are unacceptable sins in the eyes of God, and they're all equally as evil, you can see that one does more damage to a child of God than another might. So that's what I mean by yes and no. In the book of Proverbs, Solomon gives you and I some warnings against the things that we can have in our life that are not pleasing to God at all, nor do they build up character or relationships with others. But specifically, he gives us 6 things that the Lord hates and 7 that he finds detestable. So listen to Solomon in Proverbs chapter 6, verses 16 through 19. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a man who stirs up dissension among his brothers. So when it comes to this long black train of sin, you and I have all been on one or on several of these cars, and we may even be riding in some of them right now in our life. And if that is the case, then you and I need to take every measure necessary to get off this train, to get our life in order. And I think that everybody here would agree with that. So this morning, we are going to look at the first car that you and I need to avoid or that we need to get off of in order to please God with our life and to deepen our relationship with Him. That first car is called haughty or proud eyes. In other words, this comes down to an issue of pride. So that's what we're going to look at. But let's look at our first point this morning, and that is this. Pride is the idea that one person is better than another. So let's go ahead and look at this. At the base of every single sin you can think of, and if you've been in any of my classes, you've understood how I've said this before. At the base of every sin, whether it's telling a little white lie, all the way to murder and everything else, at the base of every sin, you will find the footings of pride. Pride is always at the base. Mary Lewis actually said these words. Pride, the idolatrous worship of self, is the national religion of hell. And truer words could not have been said. An evil person, whenever we think of them, you can always see how pride is intertwined in what they did. Consider Adolf Hitler for a moment. This man is many of the poster children of arrogance and self-worship. In Hitler's world, if you did not think, talk, look, or act like what he imagined to be a real German, then you were simply put to death. Nazi death camps littered the European landscape, treating human beings as if they were nothing more than animals. And for what reason? One man's pride, which led to the hatred of all those who were not like him. Pride, thinking one person is better than another, is evil. Pride, of course, isn't unique to Adolf Hitler. He got his ideas from Darwin, whose pride caused him to devise a theory which produced modern-day racism that you and I know, because different people groups were more evolved or less evolved, and it all depended on which color was your skin. And of course, needless to say, in his idea, the most evolved were those who were white. Very convenient for Darwin. Pride, thinking one person is better than another, is evil. Solomon says in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 12, before the downfall, a man's heart is proud. In other words, pride has been around ever since the beginning. Satan was cast out of the presence of God because he thought he should be equal to God. Now you find that in Isaiah chapter 14. Eve reached out and took from the fruit of the forbidden tree because she wanted to be like God. And Adam, of course, took and ate some of the fruit that she gave him because he was too proud to listen to God over his wife. Before the downfall, a man's heart is proud. Now, while I mention people like Darwin and Hitler, we could go on to talk about people like Nero and Napoleon and Stalin and Saddam Hussein and many others. We could go on and talk about many people, but pride is alive and well in the hearts of those who even call themselves believers as well. A deacon who was kind of full of himself was teaching a class of boys for Sunday school. And he was working really hard to stress the importance of living the Christian life. And with an air of arrogance, he said to the boys, why do you think people call me a Christian? And after an awkward period of silence, one of the boys finally spoke up and said, maybe it's because they don't really know you? Consider the Pharisees for a moment. They thought they were better than everyone around them. And by the way, they were not afraid to tell everybody that they thought that as well. They were a holier than thou, and they had that kind of an attitude, and it turned people off extremely fast. Now, while this type of pride is not like the same pride of Hitler or Nero, it still is a pride that is devastating nonetheless. I want you to listen to Luke chapter 18, verses 9 through 14. To some who were confident in their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray. One, a Pharisee, the other, a tax collector. The Pharisee stood up and prayed about himself. God, I thank you that I am not like other men, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I give a tenth of all that I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but he beat his breast and he said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and everyone who humbles himself will be exalted. You see, there is nothing worse than meeting a person that calls themselves a Christian, and all they want to do is beat someone down because of the way they look, because of their past, or because of something they've done. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm saying here. The fact is, there's a difference between calling sin, sin, and standing firm against it, and being a holier-than-thou hypocrite. There's a huge difference. Calling sin out, calling sin sin is exactly what you and I are called to do. However, we are to do it in humility, with respect, and with love. Now, why is that? Why should we do it that way? Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. A young woman set up an appointment with her pastor to talk to him about a sin that she had recently discovered in her life that was now beginning to worry her. When she saw the pastor, she said this, Pastor, I've become aware of a sin in my life that I just cannot control. Every time I go to church, I begin to look around at all the other women in the church, and I begin to realize that I'm the prettiest one in the whole congregation. None of the other women can compare to my beauty. I don't know what to do about this horrible sin. And the pastor replied, Mary, that's not a sin. That's just a huge mistake. Have you ever noticed that pride is the only disease that makes everyone else around you sick except for the one that has it? Have you ever noticed that? See, we are all sinners. We have all failed, and we all fall short of God's intended purpose and plan in our lives. We are no better than anyone else, but thank God if I have responded to the gospel message that I am saved. You see, you've probably heard it said before, sinners never claim to be perfect, just saved. And that's exactly what we are if we are in Christ Jesus. Saved sinners, but sinners nonetheless. So, why are there Christians that act like they're perfect? Well, it's because of their pride. Pride, thinking one person is better than another, is evil. So, the first thing that God hates and finds detestable is a person that thinks they're better than someone else for any reason at all. But the next thing about pride that I want us to talk about is simply this, how old it really is, which will take us to our next point. Pride is the oldest sin in the world. The oldest sin in the world. Now in the Hebrew, the word for proud is the word ramut. Ramut simply means to lift up, to exalt. And that's exactly what Satan did in the beginning. Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 15. It says, how you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth. You who once lay low nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. And I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mountain of assembly, and in the utmost heights of the sacred mountain. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds, and I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to the grave, to the depths of the pit. You see, pride and being all about self, and a proud person, what they think of themselves, has been around since the very beginning. It's always been there. Ever since the fall of man in the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapter 3, it has been our desire to have all the priorities of the world revolve around us. We place ourselves in the center of our own universe, and if you don't like the fact that I'm in the center of my universe, then maybe you don't belong in my universe. That's the way the world sees it. But how do we know if we're doing this? How do we know if we're living this in our life? Well, there's a few questions that you can ask yourself and see if your pride is out of control. 3 very simple ones begin to tell us. One is simply this: do you tend to cast your motives always in a good light? In other words, it's never your fault, or very rarely is it your fault. Do you tend to find reasons that all the problems you have is always somebody else's fault? Or there's a justification why you did it? Or do you tend to cut yourself more slack than you do other people? Now, if the answer is yes to any of those, you have a pride issue that needs to be worked on. And so you can begin doing that. The fact is, our pride, if left unchecked, will lead us to believe many lies about ourselves. And we will begin to believe that we are God's gift to the world and to everybody who's around us. We'll really begin to believe that. G. Gordon Liddy, who, by the way, was involved in the Watergate scandal under President Nixon, made a statement when he was released from prison after being put in prison for that scandal. And this is what he said, quote unquote, I have found within myself all I need, and all I shall ever need. I am a man of great faith, but my faith is in George Gordon Liddy. I have never failed me. But the lie that we are more important than someone else for anything else, or that I have more than someone else because of who I am, is a lie that Satan has been telling people since the Garden of Eden. It's the same lie, by the way, that he told Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 3, verse 5. For God knows that when you eat, your eyes will be open and you will be like God. Eve was thinking, wow, I can be like God? Well, maybe God's trying to keep the good stuff away from us. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 12, before the downfall, a man's heart is proud. By the way, it is the same lie that Satan teaches through cults, that people that call themselves Christians as well. Jesus was just a good man, a prophet. He was a vessel used by God just like he uses you and I. Well, let me go ahead and make sure that everybody understands something before I go on any further. You and I are not at the same level as Jesus Christ. I want to say that one more time. You and I are not at the same level as Jesus Christ. But they say things like, Jesus is not God. There is no Holy Spirit. Oh, by the way, the Bible is only good when you use our material to interpret it. That's the only way the Bible's good. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 12. Before the downfall, a man's heart is proud. It's the same lie that Satan will subtly tempt Christians with, like you and I, even today. Not that you'll be equal to God, because that would be foolish to think, and most people don't normally think that. Or not even that you could become a God, because most people don't even think at that level of foolishness either. And Satan doesn't really think you're crazy. But here it is. Here's the lie that most of us get fed. You deserve more than what God has already given you. As a matter of fact, you're much better than that person, so-and-so. Why do they have more than you? See, God's not being fair with you. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 12. Before the downfall, a man's heart is proud. You see, the fact is, if we're not careful, if we do not get our pride in check, it is powerful enough to ruin our lives because we refuse to change our course. In the summer of 1986, two ships collided in the Black Sea right off the coast of Russia. Hundreds of passengers were hurled into the sea, the watery grave below, and the icy waters, and they died. The news of the disaster was further darkened after the investigation revealed the cause of the accident. It wasn't a technology problem. It wasn't a steering problem. It wasn't the radar didn't pick up anything. Nothing like that at all. And it wasn't even a thick fog, like many people thought. The cause was human stubbornness. Each captain was aware that another ship was nearby, both of which could have steered clear. But according to the news reports, neither captain was going to give way to the other captain. Their pride, they yielded. They was not going to yield before the other one until it was too late to respond, and the ships collided and many people died. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 12. Before the downfall, a man's heart is proud. See, we know that pride is the oldest sin in the world. Mankind has yet to eradicate this terrible cancer from the character of mankind, but it destroys you and I from the inside out. Are you on a course? The question that you need to ask yourself, are you on a course for self-destruction? And are you too proud to change direction? Because I would plead with you, please change your course before it's too late, and therefore it costs you your soul. Which, by the way, will take us this morning to our last point. The last point is this. Pride will drive a wedge in your relationship with God as well as with others that you love. Now, I've seen the terrible destructive power of pride in relationships, and I'm sure that you have, by the way, as well. I have seen it ruin relationships between children and parents, between husbands and wives, between friends and friends, between Christian brothers and sisters. I've seen it ruin careers, businesses, and even churches. Pride is the seed of disunity. And disunity brings about destruction, not only to the person with the pride, but also to those around them who are innocent. In a Peanuts cartoon, Lucy comes into the room and she demands that Linus change the television channel, and she threatens him with her fist. Change the channel now. Well, Linus stands up and says, what makes you think that you can come in here and just take over? And Lucy looks at him and says, these 5 fingers. Individually, they're not much of anything. But when they come together, they make a weapon that you don't want to mess with. Change the channel. And he looks at her and says, which channel would you like to watch? And as he turns around to change the channel, he looks at his own hand and goes, why can't you guys unite like that? See, there's power in unity. But in order to have real unity, we have to get rid of pride. Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. If you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. You see, the prescription for the disease of pride is a large dose of humility every single day. That is the key principle, by the way, of unity in a relationship with God. It's the key principle, not only relationship with God, but also with others, and that is humility, considering others better than yourselves. Now, the fact is that's very easy to say. But in our hearts, as in our human nature, we want to fight about everything, tooth and nail. We want to make sure that you know what we think and what we stand for. But if you will learn to live in humility, not only like God has called us to do, but also like the example he set for us, what we will find is unity. Consider Psalm 133, verse 1. How good and pleasant it is when brothers live together in unity. Consider the biblical account of Cain and Abel, by the way, the first sibling rivalry. And also, by the way, the first biblical account of a child bringing great grief to the hearts of parents. See, Cain's pride makes him very jealous of his brother. Why? Well, because Cain's heart was wrong with God. It was not right. And so God accepts Abel's offering, but not Cain's. And I could almost see right now how Cain would stare up at the heavens and he would make a fist and say, "You've always loved Abel more than me. It's always been about Abel. Everything, it's always about Abel, 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 Abel." I could see him doing that right now. And Cain's pride causes him not to make things right with God and not to pursue to do things that are different, but he walks away in anger. That's his response. Listen to Genesis chapter 4, verses 4 and 5. But Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. And the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering. But on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Cain's pride is so bad that he just simply walks away from God. He doesn't ask God, "God, what can I do differently? How can I do it? Can you help me?" Nothing. He just walks away in bitter anger. And by the way, it's the Lord who pursues Cain, even though Cain, by the way, is completely wrong. Genesis 4, verses 6 and 7. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door and it desires to have you, but you must master it." But in his pride, even though the Lord told Cain what he needed to do to make things right, he still kills his brother. And he breaks the heart of his parents, and then he tries to turn and lie to God. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 12. Before the downfall, a man's heart is proud. In my many years in ministry, I have watched prideful young people, by the way, destroy their own lives because of their arrogance and because of their self-centeredness. And by the way, they didn't care what their parents thought. They didn't care what their preacher said. I have seen parents who had to go on medication because their prideful child had caught themselves up in so many terrible things that the parents finally broke and they just didn't know what to do anymore. And because of that, they didn't know what they should do about changing their ways. I've seen prideful parents lead their children astray because they teach their children the value of money, and ultimately it's more important than even a relationship with God. You can get to that some other time. But they don't remind them that death does not discriminate. I've also seen prideful husbands put their wives through terrible ordeals because they were so consumed with their career or so consumed with their hobby that they didn't really care about their spouse in any way, shape, or form. And I've also seen prideful wives not care about their husbands, even to the point that their husband felt that he was really not more important than anything else that was going on. As a matter of fact, he was probably last on the list. And I've seen children who grow up at friends' and families' houses because they have prideful parents that are too busy being young, too busy with their careers to even worry about children. And so they're okay with somebody constantly taking care of them. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 12, before the downfall, a man's heart is proud. Brothers and sisters, if we want to stay away from this rail car on the long black train called pride, we must be P215 Christians. P2:15. Now what that is Philippians 2, chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. If you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to his own interest, but also to the interests of others. Tonto and the Lone Ranger were out riding one day, and they go down into a canyon area, and they suddenly looked up. On both sides of the canyon were filled with Native American warriors on horses dressed for battle, ready to go. The Lone Ranger turned to Tonto, and he said, "What are we going to do, Tonto?" Tonto goes, "What do you mean we, white man?" The only way to get rid of pride in our lives is to humble ourselves before the Lord and beg his forgiveness and ask him to help us do better in our lives. Then, to keep it at bay, we must remain united with him, as well as our brothers and sisters in Christ, who will encourage us and support us and walk with us. You see, Christians united together with God and each other are unstoppable. Vesta Kelly once said it this way: snowflakes are one of nature's most fragile things, but just look what they can do when they stick together. And how true that is. You know, the Bible talks about a whole lot of things that are wrong. Sin is sin. They're all opposed to the will of God. But I want you to take notice that the number one sin in the list of things that God finds detestable to him is the sin of pride in your life. So where are you today when it comes to walking with the Lord in this journey that you and I call life? Yes, the fact is we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to stumble, and sometimes we'll even fall down. But if we are walking with Jesus, he will pick us back up, he'll brush us off, and he'll get us put right back on track the way he always wanted us to be. So where are you? Are you walking with Jesus, or are you riding on the long black train? I invite you today to come so that you may have victory in the Lord. So, I invite you to accept the grace of God by faith in what Jesus Christ did for you at Calvary's cross, and in Christian baptism, bury your old self and arise as a brand new person in Christ, ready to become the person that you need to be, ready to hopefully get off the platform and get away from the train of pride.